Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Wednesday, January 17th, and it has been updated. Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel has been updated. The header art for Steam now says Master Duel's second anniversary and is just showing a very large Blue Eyes White Dragon card. Which I would have thought the second anniversary would have been a little bit later in the year, but I guess they really did just start it just about in January 2 years ago. And another update that seems fairly obvious here is that they've gotten rid of the attract screen, at least at this point. Now, maybe that's because it's expecting me to click start and then it's going to immediately ask me to download a bunch of things and then the attract screens will come back. Or maybe they've realized that there's just a much better value in having Master Duel sit on this attract screen instead of running parts of the animations from the solo missions after you sit for a second or two. In random order. No surprise here, we are downloading something. There is always this danger, particularly in games that should be mobile first, and I would say Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game that should be mobile first, in that they just grow to a crazy extent and they're just taking up a ton of space. I would kind of hate to take up half a gig of space on a cell phone for a single game if I had a whole bunch of games installed. It's not. I have a whole bunch of apps installed on my phone. These look like these might be newer cards floating to the foreground. They never really did anything more with this animation, which feels like you could do something more with it. Although inherently that's the problem with Yu-Gi-Oh! And its second anniversary too. If I was just to quickly evaluate how well it has progressed in 2 years, I would have to say it's progressed pretty poorly. Yes, they've been consistent about adding solo modes, but nobody really cares about the solo modes. There was a burst maybe a year ago where they started to add more random events happening instead of just 100% focusing on solo play, but they really haven't done a great job in solo play of improving that, where it would make sense ever to play anything other than ranked. Like, the free play doesn't make any sense. The rewards that are available for daily quests often do not count towards free play often does not count towards the rewards of daily quests, so there's just no reason to say, hey, I don't like the ranked style of gameplay. I don't like the extra frustration that might give me because people play too hard, or because I just don't like competition in general. For that small percentage of people who might want to play Yu-Gi-Oh! But don't want the competition, which actually I think there's probably a good 20 or 30% of people like that, particularly on the digital platform, you're just not getting served well by Yu-Gi-Oh! They've done a terrible job as far as just adding new cards and trying to create a better system to wrangle the 10,000 cards in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Card collection that exist, even though there's probably only about 8,000 cards in this game. They've done nothing really in 2 years to improve the crafting point system, which is a terrible system. They've done nothing amazingly good to improve the deck building system. The main menu is wasteful and full of ads. Themed Chronicle event is now on, so we'll focus on that today, plus some new accessories. There's way too many accessories in this game. No real reason to own any of them. There's no real reason to put any money in this game unless you're just super rich and want to try and own all the cards or make it extremely high in ranked, there's no real reason to use Duel Live or watch Duel Live. You have to pay very close attention to watch a Duel Live to learn anything, and I don't believe that there's a way, if you were to watch something like this, where you could copy anybody's cards, and so the sharing of cards and decks is still a very broken system that you might easily forget even exists. Like, you can't click on Duelist A or Duelist B's name and get their decks or anything like that, so you just have to watch it. And you can see I don't even have fast forward on right now, and it's playing back really fast, and I don't know if that's because the player literally was playing this fast because they were just planning on doing a lot in one turn, or if the playback itself sped it up. Although in contrast, if I was to come over here and click speed it up, that's a little slower than you might want. I kind of want a fast forward, a double fast forward, and a skip button as options if I can affect playback. And I would like a slow play button too, where I could slow down the play if I really was trying to pay attention to what was going on. Particularly in Yu-Gi-Oh! You can see how this is literally just a one-turn kill play. And it will just be a matter of seeing if the opponent here can do a bunch of ridiculous things to counter the massive 7 cards or 6 cards on the field. And this speaks to the general problem of the 25 plus years of Yu-Gi-Oh! As a trading card game. One of the things about potentially playing in free play is that there definitely are generations of kids now and in previous generations who played games like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or more likely they started with Pokemon, or even maybe they started with Magic if they're really old. And there was just a lot of gambling and manipulation that was included in that by older kids, by bad kids. But I'll loosely say bad kids here. So it had this element of that you can play Pokemon as kind of this respectful thing. Everybody keeps their cards. We don't do trades. We don't gamble. Things like that. Those are the rules. Good parents would probably enforce and teach. But then there are also the scammer kids that are out there going to try to gamble for pocket change, real money. They're the kids that are going to try and trade really good cards for garbage cards. And that kind of negativity certainly could build into the idea that some people just like to play the game, but they don't want any of the ranked play challenge. And they don't want that level of aggression. Yeah, that is another element. There's plenty of kids certainly that will enjoy a little league baseball, soccer, things like that, but once the coaches start yelling at them and there's just a massive amount of aggression and a huge overemphasis in winning, that kind of aggressive sportsmanship can really ruin a lot of people's experience. Looks like we've got some extra daily quests to do. But yeah, the whole point of watching that duel live there was just to highlight that, yeah, you really still can't copy a deck that way. To copy a deck, you would have to do your public deck search like this, and then you'd have to click on something almost at random, and then you'd have to look at each individual card. There might be a way to copy a deck to the Yu-Gi-Oh card database and connect an account here like that, but that's basically it. Yeah, linked deck list is how you would do it, I guess. Yeah, and now that structured decks are effectively permanently in this subsection, you don't actually have to keep all the structured decks built, which means you don't have to fill up your deck slot limit, which they added after originally releasing the game, so they could charge you one more extra fee to expand your deck limit. Not that you'd likely need to ever do that. You could almost certainly find 4 or 5 decks you're not playing. Go ahead and buy these. I don't know what this theme is all about as far as the art style. You'd think it might be like a Chinese New Year thing, but Gold Pride race, some kind of new take on racing. I don't believe there is a new Yu-Gi-Oh cartoon that would lead the way towards a new Yu-Gi-Oh expansion, so I'd have to assume this is just an expansion in general. Nothing for the 2nd anniversary seems to really have changed here in solo mode, with its 5 pointless currencies. And I would say the least amount of progress that's been made has been in the solo mode. Really poor amount of progress in 2 years around this. There's no reason to play team battles, there's no reason to use duel rooms, unless you just absolutely want to try and play with your friends. There's no reason to do casual matches. And in half of the month, there will be no event happening, so half the screen will be empty space. So, yeah. Now, I will say personally, it is ever increasingly obvious that my tolerance for collectible card games has gone down, and the days of yore when I would have played Hearthstone for 5 years straight got severely reduced after spending only a couple of years playing Shadowverse and spending probably less than a year playing Magic the Gathering. But yeah, it would be hard to determine a good game to replace Yu-Gi-Oh with, unless I was just able to find some game that was completely not a card game. And yeah, maybe there is room for that now that I think about it, because I have a couple of those Sudoku games. So if I went with the incredibly slow, not really timed Sudoku games on Steam while I was talking about video game news, that would eliminate a massive amount of frustration on the timers. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Has been particularly terrible about timers for 2 years straight, in that both the timers are too long and too short, because the 30 seconds per turn is too short, whereas the 300 seconds in total is too long. Plus the very nature of Yu-Gi-Oh! Has just bloated so much that you are playing 4 or 5 cards per first turn in most cases. Yeah, I guess I could show that while we're at it. Here's a much more traditional art style for the header. Here's just a blue eyes white dragon, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Just here in the corner. For the accountability section, I didn't work on my Smart On Air sign. Again, just obviously I've been very frustrated with it, and so I'm being slow to get back to it. But I did take a bit of a break and use it as an opportunity to fix the mess I had done with YouTube Shorts, which noticeably was, I'll take that free victory, even though I probably didn't earn it. It is just a mess, and I'm almost completely done. There are going to be probably a massive amount of YouTube Shorts for the next 30 days, and then I will wait till probably about February 15th, and then I'll put out another subscription of another group of shorts. What I need to do is find a nice day to always make YouTube shorts and schedule them and have them scheduled. And theoretically that should be done like once a week on a Friday. Just have them completely scheduled at that point to get the YouTube shorts out even faster. But yeah, I've mostly been programming just scheduling YouTube shorts, not really programming. I do need to probably change the program a little bit more to filter out more Asian character Unicode symbols. There's a high enough percentage of games with one weird symbol that are getting translated into a file name that then has weird symbols in it. But yeah, I'll see if that's really worth the extra effort. I also spent some extra time today before streaming to try and reprogram my macros as far as opening up the GameDeveloper.com news articles, which the way they've made their website is kind of ridiculous because it's a pyramid. There's one large article that's a giant picture, and then below that are 2 smaller pictures for 2 smaller articles, and below that are 3 smaller articles. Then it goes back into just being a very linear, way more mobile browser friendly style design. And because of that inconsistency, I could not really find a single way to open up the news articles. So instead I just programmed it to manually do it. Just open the one large article, then the two smaller, then the three smaller, then go back to a more simplified long-running list. But with any luck and fingers crossed, that means game developer articles will be back working. So yeah, a little bit of tweaks while my computer was mostly scheduling YouTube shorts. And with the UI vision automation macros that are scheduling the videos, there is a unique ability here where pretty much nothing in that macro is actually requiring 100% of a mouse and cursor to do whatever it is. So I literally can have a macro running and it would seem like that would take up all of my computer, and I just couldn't touch the mouse and keyboard for fear of causing the macro to break or do something weird. But actually it seems like in my experiments that's not really the case. So I had a bunch of YouTube short file names that were done the wrong way, that I was renaming files on one screen while I had the macro on another screen scheduling the already uploaded YouTube shorts, doing two things at once. Well, if I keep getting disconnect victories like this, I will be very happy. That'll, like, the best case scenario here is we would just get victory after victory and be done with everything that really needs to be done, and then I could just play ranked to potentially have a chance. There's still enough time, it being over the 17th, that I could get to platinum and get a little bit lucky and get all the way from platinum up to the next level diamond. And honestly, if I got the diamond even once, there's a decent chance that I could stay around diamond each month and not fall back to gold. Because if I get the diamond 5 by the end of January, then I only have to spend February getting back to diamond 5. I don't have to go from gold up to platinum 5, then to diamond 5. I have no idea what this deck really does that I'm playing, and so far we've had 2 games that ended just in disconnects, and so it's just been no opportunity to even learn what we were going for. Okay, so I think you just said this, and this. Meanwhile, while the videos were scheduling, I'm getting close to the end of watching Eureka. There's some weirdness on Prime Video, and you can't report videos that are having video trouble or that have other bugs, which is a major mistake on Prime Video, is that you basically would have to contact customer service, and even in that, I don't think they'd actually bother to do anything. So like Eureka Season 5 Episode 1 and 2 just have some really poor video quality on them that I don't think was a case of it originally airing that way, but it's possible it was. And then there's also some weirdness in that they have these either season finales in season 4, and I think in season 3 too. They're either season finales or episodes right before the season finale, and then they have a Christmas episode that is not set in the right timeline, and it is airing in between these really cliffhanger episodes, and it's just definitely something from the past that you just don't expect from TV shows anymore, that to have a Christmas episode at all. In season 4's Christmas episode, the characters are animated, so they're different forms of Christmas cartoons and claymation and 3D CGI that looks awful. They put the 3D CGI right at the beginning, and I guess they were probably really proud of it for the time. But in modern animation styles, it is incredibly cool. Whereas the claymation animations or the Looney Tune animations still look perfectly fine because there's just less uncanny valley there. Yeah. And then while I was watching Eureka, I got curious and I tried to Google what Sci-Fi, SYFY's channel lineup might be, or what new shows for 2024 they were announcing that might be coming out. And instead of getting Google results for that, it just listed all science fiction shows for 2024, which really highlights how SYFY screwed the pooch in being a sci-fi channel. I imagine they don't have any new shows at all, but while the general idea of potentially being a let's see what we can summon here. 1900 is not going to be good enough. But yeah, SYFY as a channel screwed the pooches because they really could have been a Netflix competitor. In my mind, at least. Maybe there still would have been some really good reasons as to why that wouldn't have worked, being focused on one genre, whereas Netflix was just Stranger Things and sci-fi shows. Netflix probably wouldn't have succeeded either. But yeah, all of the TV channels drag their feet to be Netflix competitors when a NBC, Universal, Discovery, Disney, all of them could have beaten Netflix by just being faster to go that direction. And I think sci-fi in particular, if that's what you're looking for, does get close enough to being a niche audience. Like Shudder is a niche audience for horror movies where people might pay extra for that, which means you could have acted earlier. Honestly, if the Sci-Fi Channel had a streaming element on their website even, or even a YouTube channel 5 years before Netflix, there definitely could have been an audience that probably would have included me to go down that direction. To talk about video games, if G4 had experimented more with video and online content, then G4 almost certainly would have lasted past its channel being canceled and been something. I could see G4 converting itself to a site like Giant Bomb for a long decade or two, and then maybe coming back to TV after gaining more success. But yeah, when you search science fiction shows, there is actually a massive amount of shows that are supposed to be coming out in 2024. And a lot of them are video game ones, like Fallout, Last of Us. All of those are spread across 5 different streaming services where you're most likely to see them. Disney Plus, HBO Max, or whatever it's called now. Prime Video. The Boys Season 4, Invincible Season 2 are on Prime Video. So, had there been a SYFY channel streaming service, and all of a sudden you had a lineup with The Last of Us and The Boys and Invincible and Fallout all just having a much more natural home on one streaming service, that would have done, I imagine, way better for the channel. And I was thinking about this just yesterday. For the broadcast TV, the extended cable things, like that Discovery have in particular, because Discovery has like Home and Garden Television and Food Network, having individual channels that are just rerunning, well, Food Network is often just reruns Beat Bobby Flay for hours and hours and hours. If instead you had a system where you trained that audience to have to change the channel between those different channels, you then could get different eyes on different shows. So if there was a primetime lineup on Food Network where it was one Food Network show, then it was an HGTV show, then it was something new. And if you wanted to continue to watch the Food Network show, then you had to go to the HGTV channel. You could potentially hope that you could get an audience to watch your news shows during prime time instead of falling to what extended cable channels are mostly, which is just channels that are showing you old stuff over and over again, and I imagine are incredibly cheap to run since it is all just reruns, but it definitely isn't building a channel in which you could launch a new show or grow on. And eventually that's almost certainly led to the evolution of younger generations of people not watching TV at all, because why would you want to watch the Food Network when it's just reruns of Beat Bobby Flay with maybe an occasional new episode of Beat Bobby Flay on Sunday? That's not very appealing. Yep. And even for like Food Network things, Bar Rescue is not on Food Network when it almost certainly should be, or there should be a better ripoff of Bar Rescue on Food Network, but there's no real competition there. Well, we're continuing to get victories. I do wish I found the motivation to work on my smart on-air sign a little bit more in the past couple days, but it was all very valid use of my time. I did see a Slick Deals for a laptop that was like $270, and I definitely feel like it's been a couple weeks since the Christmas crash of finances happened, so I feel like I'm starting to feel the itch to buy something, and I'm going to try and fight against that and only buy things that are either really necessary, particularly since I did just buy a refrigerator. But it does bring about a thought that if I am going to be really smart, I probably should have a backup computer, something ready to go, something with a working operating system just working and running. For the most part, I can do everything I need to do on a cell phone, but I can't stream off of a cell phone. I can't really schedule videos off a cell phone. I'd also like to play around with some kind of device to install Chimera OS on it and see if that works, and then just have a device in general that I might be able to install a Linux operating system on to play around with. The problem with that though is you probably need something that would be like $150 if I was going to do that, not even a cheap refurbished laptop for $250. It's just $300, because once you get to those price points, there's just better things you could do with that money. Getting a refurbished Steam Deck. I did see someone talk about getting the Steam Deck OLED, and this was, I believe, one of the guys from DF Retro talking about it, and talking about how much better the OLED version is, because it increases battery life, and it reduces the visual bezels and introduces better backlighting, less backlight bleed, so the screen looks like it's off on the OLED version when you're playing a 4x3 retro game, instead of it looking like it's a grayish black backlit pixel. So yeah, there were some decent arguments there. I think I probably played a deck like this, come to think of it, with this World Legacy cards. They may be doing some callbacks here to some of the decks you would have used in solo mode. I guess I should also warn that there's a small chance of power outages, although I haven't seen any so far, and so there's going to be just a small chance of power outages throughout the rest of the month, for the most part. But yeah, I can see an argument of getting the Steam Deck OLED, although I'm still very much in a position where if the battery life is only about 2.5 hours on a Steam Deck OLED, or even if it was 5 hours, that's not great, and I wouldn't use it that much. Inherently, I'd want to buy a Steam Deck OLED if I was working some kind of job and I was taking hour lunches or something, and just outside of my house and outside of my computer, away from my computer. Although inherently, that is one of those cases where once you start having a job, it starts to take up more of your time, and you have more money than you do have time in many cases, and that's when buying things like a Steam Deck OLED would make more sense. But then you can quickly have no time at all while working a job, and then you're buying gadgets and not even really enjoying them. And that's ignoring the possibility of the smart on-air signs selling like hotcakes, and then spending a lot of energy weekly packing, shipping, and assembling these smart on-air signs. As part of the weather issue, I'm trying to take a little bit more of a cautious approach than I have in the past by filling up my bathtub with water. This would be emergency water, not really for drinking, unless it was a huge emergency, but just a massive amount of water for if you needed to bathe, do laundry, or flush the toilet. Mostly it's just flush the toilet would be the main thing. You'll get way sicker faster by not being able to flush a toilet than you would wearing dirty clothes or not bathing. You can practically wear dirty clothes and not bathe for years without any major risk of health other than just smelling bad. But on that part, I have a top-load washing machine. It has a soak function. The washing machine is in the garage, so if the power went out, I would want to keep all the heat in the house and not open the garage. But there are definitely scenarios where you might break that semi-airtight seal and open the garage to get some emergency water out of the washing machine. And that's not even wasting any water, really, because you can take an empty washing machine, put it on the soak cycle, it'll just fill it up with water, and then once the weather emergency is gone, you just throw some clothes into the washing machine and then turn it on to its regular washing cycle. It won't drain the tank or anything like that. So I'd highly encourage everyone to do that. Now, if you have a front load washer, there you have a bit of a problem because the soaking feature, if there is even a soaking feature on a front load washer, which they are increasingly putting people in front load washers, are probably only going to have 2 or 3 gallons. Maybe you'll get up to 20 gallons of water. You're definitely not going to get up to 40 gallons or more of water from a front load washer, which that's a level of efficiency that you will appreciate in normal times to not use a ton of water, but it's not something that you can appreciate in this case. I have an emergency bag that lines the bathtub with that you fill with water, and I didn't use it. I just filled the tub, but noticeably, because this is the bathroom that I've also turned on a space heater in, the water has seemingly evaporated in less than 16 hours, which I find that fairly shocking. I tried to put, say, saran wrap around the drain just to see if maybe there was a really slow drain that was happening there, a leak in the drain stopper and the tub stopper, something that wouldn't really be a huge issue, but from what I can tell, that's not the case. The saran wrap just floated to the top of the water, and there was no way I could get it to even float towards the drain. It is floated naturally away from the drain, so the water doesn't seem to be going down the drain, and the tub does seem solid, like there isn't any other holes in it where water could be draining. In this experiment, though, in the effort to fill my bathtub up, I turned the center knob that would switch the tub filler on versus the shower heads being on, and that I had installed it so loosely into the wall that I just pulled the entire mixing valve of the bathtub faucet out. I didn't pull it out or yank it out as much as I unscrewed it. There's a set screw that I didn't have the tool to replace or set correctly originally, and so I think it is too far outward from what it should be, and I do have the tool, but it's in the garage somewhere where I've lost it. So to account for the set screw being too far back, the entire mixing valve is too far back and not fully tightened down as much as it should be, and as such the act of turning the handle also just unscrews the whole mixing valve, and then getting it back to be correct was a hassle too, because it isn't just a matter of it needing to be fully tightened. It needs to be at a specific depth for it to work correctly. Otherwise, water will leak out of the bathtub faucet, even when you don't want it to, and it will drip. We don't want that to happen. But for somebody like me who only showers, and that's most adults, it's perfectly fine as it is, because you just have it in the shower mode and leave it in the shower mode always. Not really a professional plumber or anything, and as such I didn't do a really professional job there. Should put that in defense mode. I'm kind of screwing up everything here on this deck, but it doesn't really matter either. It seems like you really at the moment are just needing to go through the motions, and then they'll just eventually give up. Couple of stories I saw that I don't have articles for, and I think we'll jump into video game news here and try and make this whole stream go a little bit shorter. Apparently, it's being alleged, at least, that the Tekken 8 developers snuck boob jiggle into the physics of the game and the characters of the game behind the director's back, which I could definitely see from a Japanese perspective, them saying that happened when it really didn't happen that way, or them actually doing it behind his back because they generally knew that the game would sell better and be better received if it did have boob jiggles. At least in Japan it would be better received, but they didn't want to have the director have to take the blame. I'm sure if you were talking to the director directly, he probably would jokingly saying, yeah, they snuck it in behind my back, more than him being upset that they added it at all. Masahiro Sakurai's YouTube channel is also ending. This is, I believe, the developer of Smash Brothers YouTube channel, which I think was in Japanese only. And I'm pretty sure he said he was only going to run that YouTube channel for a short time, that it was kind of a pandemic project in which he'd make a YouTube channel just talking about developing games, which I could see that working a lot better for particularly celebrities, people that aren't trying to make money or just constantly succeed on YouTube. But yeah, I'd like to see more game developers say, this is where I'm going to put my mini-series talking about how I developed the games. Versus them just trying to be celebrities. Particularly Japanese game developers just don't need to be celebrities. On any site, YouTube or otherwise. In general, game developers are already treated too much like celebrities. I know I'm jumping around all over the place. There was another story I saw where apparently some of the Capcom fighting mods are getting like DRM added to them sneakily without them really announcing that. But yeah, I'm back to Eureka. I do wonder if you could make a new TV show around Eureka. I think arguably they painted themselves in a poor position because it's a near future time. So when you look at the small little PDAs that they're still calling PDAs in Eureka, that seems silly compared to what people have for cell phones now. And when they start to introduce faster than light travel as a technology, that's way too far in the future to be realistic. So the technology is just constantly either going to be ridiculous with nonsense explanations as to how it works, or it's going to be antiquated in a few years when they can explain technology, or better technology just comes about. Whereas Star Trek The Next Generation, being set in a more distant future, the nonsense science is more excusable. But yeah, I don't know if you could do a reboot of the series. I'd almost think you'd want to reboot the series as an animated series to begin with. That way you can just show off more visual effects cheaper and easier than a live action show. And perhaps it would have been smarter if they had combined science with the magic of like Warehouse 13, because Sci-Fi Channel during that time was definitely just repeating almost the exact same concepts over and over again in multiple shows, whether it was on Stargate, Eureka, Warehouse 13. There was definitely a couple more. Sanctuary might have a similar theme or concept too. And yeah, I would question whether you could do something like that. I question if the people's taste would appreciate episodic shows like that. Whereas you look at Stranger Things in comparison, Stranger Things has gone to be, Stranger Things was always very linear in its storytelling, and more that is what people want, and it almost certainly is a better way to actually tell a story instead of just drag out yourself for 100 episodes to try to get syndication, which is all they were really doing back in the day. One thing I do like about Eureka, and it's surprisingly groundbreaking, and I don't think it gets enough credit for this, is that the main antagonist in Eureka is a female who, for the most part, pretends to be a psychologist. There is maybe a sentence or two here and there that almost makes it feel like the psychology is a soft science that is against all the hard science in Eureka, and that like psychology and emotions have no place in a town like Eureka that's all about science and evidence. But they don't go hard in that. I could certainly see a show going very hard on that. But yeah, you do have this fairly consistent antagonist in this female psychologist throughout the entire series, when there is an antagonist, but the vast majority of the time they also have this interesting concept in that a lot of the episodes don't really have a bad guy at all. It is much better than almost every other show as far as creating a conflict or some kind of challenge that has to be overcome, not because somebody is just a mustache twirling villain, but because they are an over excited scientist that just makes a mistake, or they just in general in random make a mistake, or some random occurrence happens that has to be dealt with. If Eureka was written a lot poorer, you would end almost every episode with Sheriff Carter, the main protagonist, arresting and throwing in jail a random scientist of the week for making a mistake and causing a commotion. But they basically never do that in 5 seasons. Like, there's maybe 2 or 3 incidences where somebody did something really like wrong and got fired, basically. But I'm not sure anybody got thrown in jail, and perhaps to a fault. Perhaps there really should have just been a secondary antagonist person that was just a crazy lunatic that was thrown in jail and kept there. But the themes of redemption run very high in Eureka, and that's something that it deserves more praise for than I think it probably got. Because inherently, it almost certainly got no praise, because even when Eureka was in its heyday, Sci-Fi Channel was long since failed as a concept and ignored by pretty much everybody. Do I have anything else I want to ramble on about? I don't know. Do I even really need to continue playing? There's probably a lot of playing that could be done today, but we have gone about an hour, and I've gotten some lucky success already, so it makes as much sense to just call it a day and move on to the news. Apparently the Xbox Developer Direct is rumored, I guess, to be 48 minutes and 42 seconds due to it putting up the YouTube Premiere link, and apparently YouTube Premiere links leak the length of a video out. You'd think YouTube should fix that. But yeah, I don't think that really tells you much either, what the length is, other than we know it's now not likely to be a 5-minute thing. Although, in all honesty, you could have a 5-minute announcement and then have just 15 minutes before a fluff and 15 minutes after a fluff. I was watching another YouTuber talking about another YouTuber, so the inception is deep here. But what was interesting about this YouTuber that was in question, that was being discussed, is that he makes a bunch of thumbnails that show a picture of him, and then he doesn't show any face cam footage in the videos himself, which sadly I think may indicate that for a YouTuber like me who doesn't want to do face cam, there probably is a path there where if there was a face or a picture of somebody on thumbnails, and I made custom thumbnails and all, it probably would succeed better, even if it was just a fake, even AI generated face of somebody. that the algorithm is so programmed to promote videos with thumbnails with faces on it, and that it doesn't matter what the content is. Now, inherently that may get you clicks, but it probably isn't going to help you too much as far as getting subscriptions or getting watch time or views on YouTube Shorts. Millions of views, 50 million views I think is what you need to get monetized on YouTube Shorts, are the deal breakers. So yeah, we got 2,600 points here, medals, for just sticking with the game and having disconnects happen. And so I'm already halfway towards this, and I guess a quarter of the way to this, and then I guess maybe an eighth of the way to this, which is really where a minimal you want to get to is this point. And if you can go further and get some more legacy packs, that's fine. If you can't, that's fine too. As far as the daily quests go, we've made minimal progress on the Theme Chronicle, and really not enough progress on that either. But you know what, I think I might just play off screen later. I just don't feel like it's worth it to spend another 20 minutes playing a game. And then clear conditions, it'll just be a long time before we destroy enough cards to get that proficiency done. You'd think that proficiency going up might multiply something else, multiply the experience you get, even though your level rank at being at 34 means absolutely nothing, really. It's just an arbitrary level. It's not increasing the amount of experience to finish the season pass here, or is it increasing the amount I earn in gems, or increasing the amount I even earn in legacy packs? While we're here, let's open some cards, since we didn't do that at the beginning of the stream. We got 3 new cards, and then several cards we already have at least one copy of. There still are some very odd art styles. Yeah, 4 new cards. Very old animation styles like this, or just disconnected from any other animation style cards like this. And this definitely feels like a more recent card by its animation style. Then 3 clicks to get back to the main menu. Okay, so Gamatsu says that an Until Dawn movie is in development from PlayStation Productions and Screen Gems with director David F. Sandberg. Okay, that maybe makes some sense. David F. Sandberg was the director of Shazam. Okay. There is inherently a problem with making a movie around Until Dawn, if I recall correctly, because Until Dawn was the game that had multiple variations on how the story went. So making a linear canonical movie is going to not be able to play in that gimmick. The whole butterfly effect and choices and consequences almost certainly go out the window when you make a movie. Apparently, Rocksteady's co-founders have established a new studio in London. Sefton Hill and Jamie Walker left the Batman Arkham studio in 2022. This is a Video Games Chronicle article, which inherently, maybe they can see the writing on the wall there that the Suicide Squad game that's going to come out is not going to go in the direction that they want to go with Rocksteady, whereas Rocksteady was making Arkham games before. Or maybe they just, this has nothing to do with the new Suicide Squad game. Inherently, often what happens when things like this happen is you have these new teams that seem like they would go and make a new spiritual successor to Batman Arkham series, but actually they go and make something even more wild. And so then you're left with the old company Rocksteady in name, but not with the same talent, although founders maybe weren't adding that much creativity to the Arkham City anyways, or Arkham series anyways. And that is also ignoring the massive failure of the last Batman Arkham game, which, yeah, it is much more logical to assume that they left in 2022 because they were asked to leave after the last Batman game failed, not because they are afraid of even more failure with Suicide Squad. But yeah, it'll be years before we start to see what their next game is, if they even get the game to market. And it almost certainly won't have a Batman license around it, and that is very questionable as far as if you had made a game like Batman Arkham Asylum, but there was no Batman in it, no Batman characters, no DC characters in it, would anybody have cared enough to even play it? Because it would have had to have been, at that point, a Metroidvania-esque game that's very light on the Metroid elements, where you're running around a prison or a psychiatric facility stealthily knocking out characters with abilities in some kind of Metal Gear Solid style mix between Metal Gear Solid and Metroid. And that would be somewhat of a hard sell. Being on top of the gargoyles and swooping down on enemies or throwing batarang-like devices if you aren't Batman. I don't know how you translate that to something else. It would start to feel perhaps closer to a Die Hard inspired game or a Far Cry game in some themes. Batman really fed into Arkham Asylum. Now, if I think about the second Arkham game made by Rocksteady, Arkham City, that definitely feels more like a game where it could have been a random superhero running around a random walled off prison city fighting random enemies. Batman wasn't in as many buildings doing Batman things that couldn't be replaced with some other character. Although inherently, I guess you could just get the Watchmen character, Owlman. If you get the rights to that, then you could have Owlman as a parody of Batman doing the same things. Or you could just make a new superhero type character to make a game like that. But I am probably rambling here for no real reason, because there is almost, again, like I said at the beginning, not a huge chance that they'll make anything like a Arkham Asylum game, if they make a game at all. Gametsu says the game Fashion Dreamer has its New Year's update now available. This is the first of several free updates planned through 2024. This is a Nintendo Switch exclusive game, which always want to keep an eye out on these more girly fashion games to see if any of them are of any level of quality, or if the quality isn't improving in any way. There almost certainly should be some tentpole games that are like this, so that you can just have some kind of character creator with a focus on a high level of visual appeal and a higher level of fashion. Something that I could see the likes of EA having a fashion game and then using the same code from that fashion game to then make characters for their football games and their sports games, as far as the character creators go. According to GameDeveloper.com, Foam Stars will feature AI-generated artwork produced by Midjourney. Square Enix has confirmed developer Toylogic experimented with Midjourney to create in-game album artwork. I don't think there's anything special about Midjourney in most people's minds, other than it might be slightly older at this point compared to other AI image generation algorithms that might be newer. But yeah, Square Enix is, I think, fairly blatantly saying that they're going to try to make as much money on Foam Stars with the least amount of actual creative effort or cost. They also, I saw another story here put out that they don't want you to compare Foam Stars to Splatoon, which so far they have failed to show anything that would imply to me that it isn't just a Splatoon from Square Enix for a slightly older audience that plays a little bit differently. It definitely feels like a Splatoon ripoff, and it definitely feels like they haven't done anything to make it not feel like a Splatoon ripoff. Here's an interesting story from Video Games Chronicle. Billy Mitchell's controversial Donkey Kong high scores have been partially reinstated. The King of Kong quote-unquote villain had his scores wiped after claims that they were ineligible. Mitchell has been threatening to sue and suing several people, suing like Twin Galaxies and the Guinness's Book of World Records, who now is the parent company of Twin Galaxy, for years after they took his scores down. After there were many accusations of him cheating, or at the very least him not having enough of a professional relationship with the judges who would put scores up. And to this day, I think, at least on YouTube, there's a high level of people who feel like Billy Mitchell probably cheated on every single score, which, in fairness, I wouldn't be surprised if Twin Galaxies is full of just cheaters, of people who cheated on scores. But it is interesting to see any of his scores be brought back at all. There are a numerous number of documentaries that are fairly long that explain how the tapes and VHS tapes that Billy Mitchell would submit for high scores on Donkey Kong back in the day were rendering footage that looked very much like it was being run on an emulator and had bugs that would only be part of an emulated version of the video, that wouldn't be there on the original hardware. The problem with it, though, and this is his best defense, is that a lot of the VHS tapes that are of the ones he can produce or he has produced in the past are supposed to be a footage that came out so far back that they would have predated the emulator, which would only make sense if he himself is secretly heavily in the emulation scene and programmed an emulator before everybody else, or he was cheating using chip modifications, which would be my suspicion. If he was cheating at all, my suspicion is that he figured out ways to put pieces of gum on certain capacitors, remove a capacitor so that the video and the game would run at a lower frequency. Since Donkey Kong in particular hardware is not programmed but built by circuit logic, it would be very possible but difficult to replace a crystal with a slow crystal. Say there was a 60 hertz crystal in there to make the game run at 60 frames per second. If you put a 30 hertz crystal in that spot, well, that may just change everything and run the game half as fast and give an extra advantage that way. But yeah, there's a myriad of videos that highlight where people think he cheated, and there's a myriad of videos that I think are probably wrong about how they speculate he cheated. But overall on YouTube, the general assumption is that he did cheat. That being said, Twin Galaxy has found somebody, which this would be at least the second person that Billy Mitchell has gotten to submit a document on the behalf, suggesting that the tapes could in fact have been played on original hardware if they had been malfunctioning due to its components degrading over time. Which, that would be the irony of all ironies, as if Mitchell was actually innocent and he was just playing on an old arcade cabinet that was failing. For the most part, I think Twin Galaxies just wants to stop being sued, and so they found somebody to agree with Billy Mitchell. They've reinstated his high scores, including his highest score of 1,062,800 points, but only in their historical database section, which lists all the scores on the site up until its acquisition in 2014, at which point new adjunction protocols were set up. As such, Mitchell's scores are still not listed in the current Twin Galaxies leaderboard for Donkey Kong. In his own statement, for the matter, Mitchell said, "Today, January 16, Twin Galaxy has reinstated all the video game records that I've achieved in my career effective immediately." I don't believe that's accurate at all, because there was other games that he was found to have been cheating on, I believe. I'm so relieved and satisfied to reach the resolution after almost 6-year ordeal, and look forward to pursuing my unfinished businesses elsewhere. While with the saga of Mitchell being ongoing, the Donkey Kong high score has continued to rise. The current high score is 1,272,800, which was achieved by Robbie Lakeman in 2021. And I don't believe Robbie Lakeman is even in King of Kong. Which that's in part allowed the story to die down quite a bit. I can't even tell you the name of the protagonist in King of Kong, because I think it was like Steve Wiebe or something. Yeah, he gets so overshadowed by somebody playing the bad guy. That being said, there is a bigger question, certainly, when you think about Billy Mitchell. This is perhaps just an economics question that I won't delve too deep into. You have somebody who, at least at the time, was considered to be the best of the best at playing a video game, and there's really just no way to monetize that or be rewarded for that. And that's whether you're talking about Billy Mitchell or you're talking about the 13-year-old kid that beat Tetris. There's no reward for that. There's no highlights for that. You get your 15 minutes of fame and then you move on. I did see an article where Nintendo was donating like 50 billion yen. I believe it was billion. It may have just been million yen to earthquake disasters, and they promised to repair anybody's house whose was damaged or something like that, which seems to be very generous. But Nintendo didn't bother to try and get any like good press by giving some kind of reward to the 13-year-old, some kind of scholarship or something. And no other video game stepped up to do that, when by all rights Devolver Digital or somebody should just step up and give that 13-year-old kid who beat Tetris something, at least a t-shirt. But I could also see them just trying to stretch that 15 minutes of fame all over the place. The ESA, as a lobbyist group, should definitely get that 13-year-old kid in front of the camera and have them be a spokesman and have them highlight all the positive things about video games. You really can't pay for that kind of press coverage, and yet nothing has happened with it. And for Billy Mitchell, decades previous, nothing really happened with Billy Mitchell. As far as I can tell, Billy Mitchell seems to have been fairly independently wealthy even at a young age, which definitely would explain the kind of arrogant attitude. He has a hot sauce business. He maybe owns some car dealerships or something like that. But yeah, he definitely seems like he has enough money to hire lawyers and enough money to fly around and go do appearances. Of course, after the accusations came out, all he could really do is sue people, because any kind of appearance fees he might have been getting probably went completely in the trash once accusations of cheating were implied. So, yeah. There really needs to be a better way. I mean, Billy Mitchell very well may have done the absolute right thing for himself by just making himself look like a villain and suing people, because that's the only way you could possibly monetize it. I could have seen him sue Guinnesses and Twin Galaxies for lost appearance fees for the rest of his life and get maybe a couple $1 million out of that. Whereas had he been accused of cheating and just disappeared, he wouldn't have gotten anything for that. Or had he never been accused of cheating, he would have probably gotten a few appearance fees. But it's kind of hard to get an appearance fee for showing up for winning a Donkey Kong high score in the 80s. He probably got some decent money by being on King of Kong, and yeah, he definitely got more coverage by being on King of Kong. There is almost certainly a problem with the way King of Kong was made, and that clearly there was a story they were trying to tell and a bias they were trying to tell there. They weren't just blandly stating facts. They were trying to form a narrative where there was a good guy and a bad guy, and that there was this epic challenge. And it worked so incredibly well that people are still very happy to accuse Billy Mitchell of cheating, whereas other cheaters on Twin Galaxies have not gotten that much of negative press. And arguably there's a problem with trying to fight back and clear your name if you actually believe yourself to be innocent, because the second you try to fight back against the internet mob, they just go even harder to ruin you. And then that's another thing that society's going to have to address, I imagine, at some point. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Starfield's biggest update has been delayed. Bethesda is still hoping to release the over 100 fixes and improvements this week in Steam beta. Their 100 fixes and improvements, though, not going to drastically change the game, I'm sure. Let's see, the Larian boss Sven Vinke says that subscription-based future could be, quote, savage. The studio founder believes that bringing Baldur's Gate 3 and other Larian titles to subscription services could result in a critical failure. This is from GameDeveloper.com. Particularly, I imagine third-party developers are not in a position where they would be pro-subscription-based futures, but there are plenty of third-party developers who effectively have done that with the Epic Games Store and felt like that gave them some money for getting that exclusivity. But I guess there's a slight difference between getting paid extra money by being exclusive for 6 months versus the game never being available for purchase and only being available by people subscribing. Inherently, a subscription-based option is only going to work for the likes of Microsoft and PlayStation and Nintendo, and only if they have tentpole games that are subscription system seller equivalents, which could be Call of Duty for Microsoft, and might be something like a Last of Us for PlayStation, and could be several Nintendo games for Nintendo. But there would have to be several tentpole games, and I can't really name a second tentpole game for Xbox Game Pass after Call of Duty that would sell the subscription to a new audience, and I really can't name another game for PlayStation. So weirdly, Nintendo probably is the best primed to go all subscription. If you were paying $400 for the next Switch or Nintendo console, which is the rumored price, maybe that does make a lot of sense to just have a subscription service and get all the games that they are willing to make, and then Nintendo may just slowly make less games because of that. Although certainly they still would be charging you extra each month for a subscription. Yeah, I could see Nintendo in particular wanting $50, $60, $70 a month to give you one Nintendo game per month at most. Larian Studio, according to Video Games Chronicle, Larian's boss says their studio games won't come to a subscription service. Direct from developers to players is the way, according to Sven Vinke. So same response, same article here being reported on. I will say though that he is perhaps dangerously close to taking too many interviews and being quoted too much. I would think after you have a major success like Baldur's Gate 3, maybe you should just stay pretty silent and not take interviews until you have some update to announce, or until you're ready to announce your next game. He's been very vocal and very public with his opinions, and so far people are agreeing with him, and maybe that's getting him personally some good press, and maybe that's getting the company some good press, but you're taking a high risk there when you could just say Baldur's Gate 3 is out. We're glad everybody's enjoying Baldur's Gate 3. We have nothing more to say at this time, which would be the much more safe and logical thing to say. Let's see. Sunshine Days developer NetSpeak Games is making layoff. This UK-based studio is blaming the cuts on dwindling investment opportunities and challenging industry landscapes. Which, wait a minute, at that point, why is a video game company needing investment opportunities in either direction, really? The video game company is probably failing if you need people to invest in it. Otherwise, you're going to lay off people, or if you're taking the profits from your previous video games and investing in other companies, particularly if you're not seeking a direct merger or acquisition, which that would be interesting, certainly, where if one company like Microsoft was not allowed to invest in another video game company unless they show evidence that they are actively trying to acquire that company, which the vast majority of companies that invest in other companies are really just trying to hold enough stocks to make the profits off of other people's work, just like any other shareholder is really just making profits off of the associate level, the low level employees' work. But yeah, it would be an interesting thought experiment, at least, to say you can invest in a company for 5 years, and then if you haven't acquired them in 5 years, you have to divest in that company, and you can't reinvest in it for another 5 years. There definitely are a lot of thought experiments that need to be considered as far as preventing companies from just putting profits into the investment of into the owning of shares of other companies, and instead profits need to be paid down to employees or paid out in dividends to shareholders of their company, instead of paying down of debt. There's definitely an argument that almost every company needs to pay down debt way more. Inherently, a company having a massive amount of debt, if it's big enough, is a problem for the government of the company that the company is based out of, more than it's a problem for the corporation, because they'll just ask for a bailout, or they'll create such an economic problem if they go bankrupt that they still don't have to really worry about it. It's kind of crazy that the generally accepted accounting procedures allow corporations, major corporations, Microsoft, $1 trillion corporation, I believe now, companies like that are just allowed to willy-nilly create as much debt as they can get away with in the economy of a country, with almost no regulation on that end. The banks may not give out loans, but there is almost no direct control there as far as whether a government agency regulates whether banks give out loans, which creates more debt on the bank's books, while also creating more debt on the corporation's book. Moving on. Let's see. GameDeveloper.com also has an article here, why The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered Roguelike mode won't get any DLC. Matthew Gallant, game director of The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, these titles are getting way too long, explains why No Return won't receive any future content updates. So what's the actual reason? He says it's going to be a complete experience at launch. We don't have any plans for additional DLC for it. So just kind of a flat no as far as the question of DLC. In the third small paragraph of this article, which then goes on for another small paragraph, and then you have effectively a change of focus where they're saying that DLC is going to be on customization. The thing that gets me, and this is uniquely my problem because I haven't played The Last of Us at all, is I just don't know what the gameplay mechanic is in The Last of Us that would make it that good that you would even want to potentially play a roguelike mode. The first Last of Us game to me felt like it was a stealth Metal Gear Solid like game where you're for the most part trying to sneak around the clickers, and if you get behind one of them you can get an instant kill, but I think most of the time you're just trying to distract them and move from point A to point B. Last of Us 2 maybe introduces a bow and arrow. Obviously I see a shotgun here, so there must be some gun shooting, but I still don't feel like that is what Last of Us is best at as a game. I don't think you spend hours and hours in Last of Us enjoying hunting and killing and sneaking around enemies. I thought people liked Last of Us for at least the story in the first game. So yeah, playing Last of Us Part 2 in a roguelike mode feels like you're just playing the story events of the second game with maybe some randomized items and a progress resetting if you die, which would be what a roguelike is, not a roguelite, L-I-G-H-T. Gamatsu says Ace Combat 7 Skies Unknown Deluxe Edition is coming to the Switch on July 11th. And then the former Rockstar North boss has netted $110 million to launch what sounds like a metaverse. Leslie Benzies established a Build a Rocket Boy to create a community-driven gaming space called Everywhere. Which, okay, that sounds like a metaverse to me. Still not really sure what you could do with that. Although inherently, if you stepped away from the negativity around the metaverse and just assumed that game developer got it wrong and instead just looked at the description of community-driven gaming space, it could just try to be an evolution on a video game website like Giant Bomb, a wiki, a forum, a database, forum for communication. Like Reddit's had major problems, although nothing's really replaced it. Twitter's had major problems, although nothing's really replaced it. So I could see trying to make a video game website of some sort and even take it to the next level where there is perhaps an interface that makes it feel less like a website and makes it feel more like a VR metaverse. But if the focus really is on the community, there might be some success there, because video game fans have struggled to ever have a real community, let alone maintain a community of gamers, because there really isn't one type of gamer. Almost everybody games nowadays. I could see even a Twitch competitor coming about, and that making some sense. If all of a sudden you had a website and it was half Giant Bomb and half Twitch, that would be something interesting, at least, where all of a sudden there's a really good database, there's a text forum to talk about video games, but there is also a section for video where people can stream their gameplay and hang out with other gamers, particularly if it's very much all about video games and hot tub streamers and all that nonsense. Twitch thoughts in general are just not really welcome, then that might have some appeal to me. In the same way that YouTube Gaming, back when it was something, had an appeal for a special community specifically for gamers. Of course, YouTube Gaming is all but abandoned at this point. Of course, we also will probably not see anything from this for years, if anything comes from it at all. And if this screenshot is not just a random screenshot, it definitely feels much more like a metaverse in the visuals. But I could see it working. Like, Fortnite is surprisingly working. If Fortnite all of a sudden had a forum in it, and you could hang around as your Fortnite skins talking to each other, I think that would work pretty well. Moving on, the Nexion-owned mobile studio Pixelberry is conducting layoffs also. The studio is known for working on narrative titles like High School Story and Hollywood U. So we're continuing still to see large amounts of layoffs. Thunderful is laying off 20% of its staff as the workers pay the price for, quote, overinvestments. The need for Thunderful to enact these changes stems primarily from overinvestments made in the last few years, which that is a non-explanation for the most part. I don't know if overinvestment is even the right phrase to use, but I can somewhat understand what they might be trying to imply, which is that they invested in the development of 3 or 4 games when they only had enough funding to work on 1 game, or maybe 2 games. That's the part that most gamers are never really going to be able to see, and thus they're never really going to be able to have a full grasp on, is that companies, video game companies, really need a trust fund from the likes of Microsoft or PlayStation or Nintendo, so that they can, in parallel, have programmers developing concepts and entire games, have 3 or 4 games in development, for the hope that one of them actually gets made into the game, and maybe some elements from the other 3 get made into a game, and from that then you have a hope that maybe 1 or 2 of those games actually go on sale, and maybe one of them sells particularly well, where the other is just going to be mediocre. Whereas the gamers, we only really see the end product, and then you have games that are like the Gearbox Battleborn, I believe was the name of the game, where clearly Battleborn was something that they had been secretly working on at Gearbox for a long time, and it was just not marketed well, it was just not received well, and Gearbox clearly needed at least one more successful game to balance out Battleborn's failure, outside of making continued Borderlands games. And even now I think Gearbox needs 1 or 2 more successful games, or different games that they're releasing at least. I think they probably should have continued to support Battleborn just because they didn't have anything else to offer. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says an Elden Ring update on Steam's backend suggests that DLC news could be imminent. It's been recently claimed that the game's Shadow of Erdtree expansion would launch in February. It'll be interesting from the outside looking in, since I never played Elden Ring, and probably never would play it. It's just going to be too difficult of a game for me. It'll be interesting though to see if people go back to Elden Ring. It got a pretty good reception. It wasn't amazingly well received, in the sense that people weren't still playing it in large droves 6 months later, but it was very well received otherwise in that initial launch window. And then for the most part, it feels like they haven't done anything with it since then. Astra Fund repositories as Thinky publisher repositions, not repositories. The Astra Fund repositions as the quote Thinky publisher Astrological following layoffs. The reborn publisher has already helped a group of former Zachtronic developers establish a new studio called Coincidence. This is from GameDeveloper.com. So I do know Zachtronics. They are the company that made a bunch of programming inspired games, probably at least 2 or 3 too many, and in a lot of ways they were doing kind of introduction to programming without programming, and often doing programming or logical puzzle solving in ways that probably didn't help you learn programming that well in the first place. There was an alchemy game from Zachtronics that I played, and I thought I would enjoy it quite a bit, and in the end I actually found it pretty poor of an experience. So the publisher is changing their name after laying off people, which I'm a little surprised that trend isn't happening more often, frankly. There's a lot of companies here willing to lay off people and using the fact that they're laying off people to get what would be considered good press amongst shareholders, because I suspect a lot of these companies are announcing layoffs and then immediately getting a boost in their shareholders' price because they've announced layoffs, which that's nasty, but that's also the mentality of a lot of shareholders. The support studio PTW has laid off 45 staff across the global teams. With PTW's newest cuts, the game industry is at nearly 3,000 layoffs, and it's only halfway through January. Which, yeah, at what point does it start becoming a case where people are fully admitting that not all of those video game programmers can get new jobs in the video game industry, and thus the video game industry must be shrinking? Like, it probably is. Now, maybe it's shrinking back to a more stable size, but notably, nobody said we are laying off a bunch of people and our game is going to slash its budget in half and be a much smaller game. We're not getting any kind of admission there. So I imagine the budget for AAA games is still going to be massively high, and the amount spent on production and promotion of games is still going to be at an all-time high. Yep. But the barrier to entry to starting your own video game company is also particularly low, and a lot of these game developers, if they want to continue to work in the video game industry, could go off and make their own company or just make indie games and put them on Steam Direct. Although I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these people who work in the game industry frankly don't care if they stay in the game industry and just move on to higher paying, better, more stable jobs in programming in general. Or just similar other career paths. Let's see, there's also a report from GameDeveloper.com that Certain Infinity's Halo Battle Royale project has been cancelled. Certain Infinity and 343 Industries' Open Secret was a Battle Royale game for Halo Infinite that's now reportedly dead and gone. This is from the Xbox Era podcast. Increasingly, though, I question if these rumors aren't in part being made up. possibly being coordinated. And speaking of being coordinated, there was a hack at, I believe, Capcom, maybe it was Sony, that happened a couple weeks ago, and a lot of people came out and said they weren't going to talk about the hack because their claim was because there was personal information in the hack that was being released, and there was a whole ransomware thing. I heard that argument made by several mainstream video game journalists, and I can't help but wonder if there wasn't some coordination there. We haven't inherently had to tread old news as far as the reaction to Gamergate from many, many years ago, and I hate to even use the phrase Gamergate since it's such a dead thought, but it is fully admitted and known that some of the people who were at Giant Bomb at the time that Gamergate was happening were on a private group chat amongst a significant amount of mainstream video game journalists, and they were talking amongst each other and actively coordinating how they were going to respond to certain stories and how they were going to cover certain stories. And there was never any evidence that those kinds of group chats went away, or that there was any reason that they felt it might be unethical to coordinate messaging and effectively try and create propaganda in one direction or another. And that's probably the case in a lot of types of news reporting, not just video game journalism, but perhaps there are just higher standards that you would hope other kinds of news reporters would follow. But yeah, there is almost certainly still coordination happening. We see evidence of at least groupthink from mainstream video game journalists. Now the good news is in 2024 they're as irrelevant as ever as far as mainstream video game journalists. You do have still a major part here where your gamer is the source that game developer uses to report as the first mainstream news source, who is then just reporting on a rumor from a podcast. But yeah, the fact that you're getting rumors from podcasts now and reporting it as news definitely highlights how video game journalism is basically considering that a valid news source and lowering their own standards when they probably shouldn't. But yeah, I can never really wrap my head around that story, though, to not report on news. I could see having some ethics in not reporting on the personal information, or saying personal information was also leaked, but not giving out any of the personal information, obviously. But to say you're not going to report on the story at all when it was valid news is ridiculous. Although inherently, even for quote-unquote news reporters like me, I am not reporting on everything, so that there is a lot of stuff that probably should be reported on by a lot of people and aren't being reported on for one reason or another. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Diablo 4 Season 3 has been revealed for whoever is still into Diablo 4. I doubt there's that big of a player base. Of course, we don't have SteamDB for Diablo 4 to see how many people are playing it. The resetting nature of Diablo still is a major problem for me. If they ever got rid of the resetting nature and had a mode where you could just make a character and play as that character and go through story mode without having a timer on it, I might consider playing Diablo 4, but yeah, I'd much prefer to just play Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 on Steam first before thinking about playing Diablo 3 or Diablo 4. And frankly, I'd like an abridged, remastered version of all of the games to tell me just the story more than anything. Some of these stories might be a little bit older, as far as GameDeveloper.com saying Ubisoft is reworking its subscription service and hopes players will forget about ownership. Here we have Video Games Chronicle saying, as a feature, Square Enix wants you to stop comparing Foam Stars to Splatoon. This artwork here definitely feels like it's trying to evoke something closer to Overwatch than Splatoon. Being compared to Splatoon, though, it's not a bad comparison. It would be better if it was Splatoon plus something else, Splatoon plus surfing, or Splatoon plus more mature content. But yeah, so far I haven't seen anything that would be that plus. Splatoon plus foam parties seems to be about the whole concept. But they also have a major advantage in that Foam Stars can come to PC, where Splatoon will almost certainly never come to PC. Then they also have the major problem of being from Square Enix, where I wouldn't be surprised if Foam Stars as a game gets released and then immediately gets trashed on by the Square Enix management as not selling well enough, and then they abandon it. Let's see. Video Games Chronicle has an article here where Take-Two filed a trademark dispute over Remedy's new logo, saying it's too similar to Rockstar's. I don't think the similarity is particularly here. This is with the UK Intellectual Property Office. The letter R is not trademarkable or copyrightable, I would assume, in the UK as much as I would assume in the United States. So you have Rockstar that has a star here when there is no star, and then just white and white being part of the color palettes is not unique enough to make a complaint. Whereas Rockstar's incredibly simple logo only has one more color in this yellow, which there's not a bit of yellow in Remedy's logo. Noticeably, the font for this R has this curvature and this extra leg here, which gives you this middle ground, where this is a much more sharp middle section, and there's an elongated hole here where this is not like that. Remedy also then cuts part of its R off and adds a copy of a section of the R, which thematically doesn't really mean anything because there isn't a second R hidden in here. You would think you would want an E on this side for the next letter. Or thematically, you might try to visually depict the phrase remedy or fixing something, but they don't have that. Because of the cut, you have kind of a unique shape in this triangle here, and you're overall creating a unique shape. And then you just have the word remedy. Noticeably, neither one of these logos show a trademark symbol or a registered trademark symbol when being displayed, but you don't inherently have to do that when displaying it in the logo format, but you would want to do that in some legalese. But yeah, I don't see a real comparison here. I don't think we need to get to the point where, as the video game industry grew, there could only be 26 video game companies in total at most, each with one letter representing one letter of the alphabet representing their company. And ideally, in a situation like this, if Rockstar is going to waste their time and money filing trademark disputes, the UK office should come back and say, you know what, we've looked at your logo, and Rockstar, your logo's not trademarkable either. It's all too generic. I'd like them to come back and say neither one is trademarkable, get over it, and pay somebody a little bit more money to make an actual logo. Rock in Rockstar. It's not even really here as a logo. And there's not even an impression of driving, since Rockstar is mostly known for GTA, you could see like maybe drawing a line from this point to this point and making a road, and then making this look like a tunnel where a car is driving through a tunnel. And that would imply driving. Or you could see a boulder here, or even a boulder cut in the shape of a star for Rockstar. So you have an R, then a boulder cut in the shape of a star. And that's the problem with a lot of these logos, is that if I hid the Remedy part here, I would never figure out that this is supposed to mean Remedy. If I hid the star here and I wasn't familiar with Rockstar, I'd never figure out that this is supposed to be Rockstar. If I wasn't familiar with Rockstar even as it is, I would call this R-Star, which is a better name, frankly, for a company anyways. For Remedy, I probably would have taken the R and tilted it like it was broken, have a little zigzag broken on it, and then put a little bandage over it, holding it together. And thus you're remedying a broken R, but then you also don't want to imply brokenness in your video games, so Remedy is generally just a bad name for a company anyways. What in the world is this? Oh, this is part of the Riven remake that they were talking about, and in particular it's Cyan talking about how they've changed a decent amount of stuff in Riven, so it's not going to be a case where you just go and play this Riven remake. I think this might be a GameStop article from the looks of it. It's somebody's article. My digital publication. I have no idea what publication this is, but yeah, issue 362 of Game Informer. So this is a Game Informer digital article, I guess. But yeah, they have basically changed the puzzles. They're changing the layout. That one of the things that I felt like was a little weird for them to admit is that they've changed the layout so that the parts of the island feel more naturally connected, like in an actual history and an actual natural way. The islands and sections of the islands in Riven would have naturally all occurred in the same culture, in the same way of thinking, with the same kind of construction techniques and materials, which to my understanding is the exact opposite of what Riven was in the original game. It was intentionally the case that some sections were designed by the bad guy, and they were using the Dunny technology and using the Mist creation books to create a world that is sharply different between the native people who he was treating like slaves, and then his godlike sections where he was acting like a god and allowing them to worship him. And so I would hope that there's still some of that. But then I could see in Riven a point where right in the middle of two sections there's a load section, and they have a vehicle that transports you from one section to the other to hide the load. I could see getting rid of that in the remake and just making it more of a natural, you can walk from one end of the island to the other end of the island without ever seeing a load section, and thus you can move around a little bit faster and more naturally. And I could see sections being more open and interconnected instead of there being just one doorway to enter and exit each section. But the more they change, the more I imagine hardcore Riven fans are going to feel at odds with it, the game. Let's see. Moving on. Here's that story I was talking about before. Nintendo is donating 50 million Japanese yen to support earthquake victims and offers free repairs to those affected. The Pokemon Company has made similar donation earlier this month, although I believe it was considerably less money than 50 million. This is from Video Games Chronicle, which, particularly in Japan, I imagine earthquakes and tsunamis are just going to continuously happen, as they always have happened. And if anything, it gives them an excuse to tear down and rebuild a bunch of buildings. I imagine the country of Japan would do very well if they had large public funded outcries to tear down and rebuild by modern styles a lot of the cities outside of Tokyo, because there are a lot of abandoned cities outside of Tokyo. But the problem with that is you can't just governmentally fund a rebuilding of a city when there is no economy in that city. There are no jobs in the city, so they need to also move jobs outside of Tokyo and create new jobs if they were going to do that. My thought is they should probably create a bunch of very nice tourist towns / college towns, and it should just be fairly standard to send the kids to a college town away from their families, and yeah, outside of Tokyo. This could be a big announcement from Gamatsu, certainly, that Prison Architect 2 has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Prison Architect 1 got a lot of coverage by YouTubers, but I am noticing immediately the visuals feel fairly different from the original Prison Architect. And if I recall correctly, Prison Architect 2, I think, is being made by a different company than Team 17, which I believe was the makers of Prison Architect 1. Seems like the publisher might be Paradox Interactive. There is also certainly just a case here where Prison Architect 1 was very popular years ago. It may not be so popular these days, with people having moved on to several other later trending games. Let's see, the Fallout Twitter account here, I think, had a picture of another character. Jonathan Nolan is the co-creator, and they've got another character here in a vault suit. Let's see, Lucy, she's an upstanding member of Vault 33, where she spends her time preparing for the future. Inherently, I still just really question the feel of the Fallout TV series and how that's really going to work. Like, as a TV series, it just feels like it's going to come off cartoony, particularly when you see like this ghoul character with his nose missing, or when you see the heavily armored Brotherhood of Steel characters. Inherently, there is this problem where Fallout needs a story as a TV series, and it really just doesn't have that much of a story in video game form. Like, what are you doing in Fallout 3? You're chasing after your father, which takes you on a bunch of interesting but not part of the real main story side quests, and that's basically the entire main story. Is you're chasing after your father in Fallout 3. What are you doing in Fallout 4? You're chasing after your son. You go on a bunch of side quests that I don't even think people mention that much, having not played the game myself, and then eventually you find your son, and that's pretty much the entirety of the main story in Fallout 4. What are you doing in Fallout Vegas, the non-Bethesda game? You have amnesia and you're trying to get $1 million chip back or something. You're chasing money. People received that very well. There is news stories that imply that several more Fallout New Vegas type games were pitched and rejected by Bethesda because Bethesda wanted to make the games themselves and get all the glory themselves, as the implication that a Fallout New Vegas style game was pitched for the Elder Scrolls Skyrim series, and Bethesda instead was just focused on Elder Scrolls Online, which in fairness that probably worked out very well for them. And I would say even the story of Skyrim, you're investigating what being a Dragonborn is all about at the beginning, and then there's a civil war in the middle, and then you eventually fight a dragon at the end, which that's more of a story than just chasing after somebody. So Skyrim's a little bit better there. If you were going to make a Skyrim New Vegas type game, I don't know what you really change there from Skyrim. You probably just set it in a different region and do a very similar story. I'm also noticing here that this logo for Fallout has been intentionally designed so that it looks like a skull. You've got some teeth here, you've got some cheekbones here, and you've got an eye socket here and an eye socket here, and the body is a nose. So in the negative space, all the white, this looks like a skull. But I can't really make out what even this is supposed to be. Whether this is supposed to be a tunnels or something. And obviously this is supposed to be a blown out part of a city. Looking at the game, the Fallout game, the Fallout TV series almost feels like it needs to be episodic. And perhaps just a fairly light-hearted, maybe even somewhat like the TV series Eureka episodic series, where your main protagonist goes somewhere, there's a new enemy for that one episode or a new challenge for that one episode, and then they just move on to the next thing. So every episode just feels like a side quest in a Fallout game. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says the controversial game Martha is Dead is being turned into a movie. The controversial horror game was censored on the PlayStation platforms. If I recall correctly, there was a small hubbub about this game, but not that much. This was the one where she cuts out, or you interactively cut out what looks like a fetus out of the stomach of a corpse of a character. Yeah, here's the scene. So you have this dead character, and you in some versions of the game, not the PlayStation version, you take scissors and stab it in the stomach and cut something out. It's all very gory and psychological. But yeah, the controversy didn't hurt the game. It probably helped it a little bit, but also it is definitely a case where nobody has said anything about Martha is Dead for years. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if movie makers, particularly on streaming services, are desperate for any kind of storyline or plot. And so we might see a lot of the mid-tier and even the low-tier horror games all of a sudden selling their scripts to the likes of Netflix or Shudder just to make a low-budget horror movie. Which I think that might work fairly well, since a lot of the horror games are very linear in their storytelling anyways. What will be interesting to see about this movie is if it does get made and get released, will it all of a sudden be censored yet again in movie form, or will it be a direct example of a scene being shown with 3D animated characters being considered more offensive by a different censor board than the same scene potentially being shown with real life characters in a movie. Let's see. Kimetsu has Tomb Raider 1, 2, and 3 remastered details, enhancements, and new features. I am still very concerned as far as how much they can really improve on these old games, if they can make them playable at all. Having modern controls versus tank controls certainly seems like something that would be helpful. Action indicators or walking to an action might be helpful. Sensitivity and dead zones and things can be helpful. Giving a boss health bars is informative, at least. And then they are definitely just replacing a lot of textures and a lot of 3D sprites when you compare these pictures here. And perhaps they're not even really doing a great job at it, but they're making some level of improvement. As far as you can see, this texture has been redone, these have been tweaked, these have been tweaked, this texture has been completely redone, this foreground texture has been redone, and this 3D model has been redone, and so is this. Although they still are targeting the cartoony look of the original Lara Croft here. They're not trying to completely remake her vision. There's going to be over 200 trophies, which gives you an excuse to play the game if you've already played it. There's a photo mode, which almost any game should have a photo mode. And then there's baked in and real-time lighting effects, so I'd assume this is what it looks like in the remake, and this is what it originally looked like. And this is probably a great example of where baked in lighting and effects can drastically affect how a game looks and how modern a game looks. Real-time lighting is ray tracing, or like ray tracing at least, and not always 100% necessary, but just having baked in lighting saying this wall is in shadow, so this should be dimmer than if this wall that might be in direct sunlight on the other side. And then it seems like at any point you're just going to be able to toggle the graphics. Now there is kind of obviously a problem here in that the better graphics in some of these examples are also the busier graphics. There's just more foliage and more things to visually distract you from what you actually need to do in the game. There's going to be new models, environments, and enemies. So here's your model for Lara Croft. and there'll be additional updates. So yeah, and the Steam link to that game is not available. While we're here though, let's see what the Steam Deck OLED costs. $550. Man, that's expensive. Yep. I would really like to see that price go, and I'd like to see the LCDs just be out of stock completely. Price deck drop for the dock is still pretty poor. Didn't see anything at CES as far as here's dock specifically designed for the Steam Deck. There's room for improvement there, certainly. $550 is just really expensive. It definitely, at that price point, makes it more logical to buy a refurbished $300 laptop and see if you can get Chimera OS on it. Although I almost have to make sure I'm matching beat for beat all of the amount of RAM and CPU processing power to make it a fair comparison. And I want to see the refurbs. Do I have the refurbs? Yeah, here it is. Here's the refurbs hidden. Okay. Yeah, I just haven't seen any refurbs in stock for a long time now. And yeah, it's very arguable whether it's worth it to get the refurb of the 64 gigabyte version, even which still is a little too expensive. Moving on, Stalker 2 has been delayed to late 2024, according to Video Games Chronicle. Street Fighter 6 has topped 3 million sales in 6 months, which that's a very reasonable amount of sales for a niche game, which fighting games are somewhat niche, to get in 6 months. Dragon's Dogma 2 says, the director of Dragon's Dogma 2 says that newcomers can safely dive in because the hero has amnesia. Players won't need to know about past events because they'll be explained to them, which definitely implies that people who do remember the events of Dragon's Dogma 1 are going to get a recap whether they want it or not. And it definitely feels like it is a poorly thought through solution to the problem. It definitely feels cliche to start with amnesia these days, and it's questionable who is the last main protagonist of a game that did have amnesia. It very well may be the protagonist of Skyrim. Certainly you can make an argument that, like Prey, the protagonist has amnesia, but that's slightly different. Having amnesia as your main character was cliche decades ago. Bringing it back is not going to stop it from being cliche. The Godot engine here did an interesting retweet, if I can find it, of someone comparing two types of physics engines in the Godot engine. One called, here it is. It's kind of interesting that they retweet this because it highlights problems with Godot physics versus this other Godot Jolt. So they have this physics example minigame where you would swing the hanging wooden ball and try and knock all the pins down, and then you hit play here and you see the difference in how the physics work with Godot physics versus Godot Jolt. And very obviously Godot physics, as they programmed it in their example, which I think they more than likely programmed it poorly, work in a very unnatural, crazy way, whereas Godot Jolt works in a much more natural feeling way. Now, I'm going to throw out a theory here and just call it a game theory, which I guess I can now steal that since game theory's guy is gone. But I think a big reason why a lot of physics breaks in a lot of older games is because they put in code that is designed to prevent things from clipping through things. It's designed, for instance, to have the pins lay flat on the table, not clip through the table, and to affect that, sometimes what they'll do is they'll have a pushing field inside walls, inside objects, inside tables that would push the object upward. Well, by pushing the object upward, you're magically adding momentum to the object that it naturally wouldn't have, and that compounds the problem and flings objects across the screen. That is my suspicion as to how this all goes. And so it may very well be a case that the cure for a potential clipping bug is worse than the problem of a potential clipping bug. And while there in the old days were games that would have maybe had objects just clip into a wall and be stuck in the wall, that might just be the better solution. Less programming anyways. But yeah, it's a little interesting that Godot would even retweet this as far as the Godot engine. But from this, assuming this is accurate and not correct, I guess you should use Godot Jolt as a sub-engine of Godot to run physics. Refused classification talks about censorship in Australia, of which there's quite a bit. They did mention here, though, on the 16th, that Fiona Jolly has resigned as the Director of Classifications Board effective the 11th of January. She was appointed 3 years ago in December of 2021. Prior to that, she was the convener of Classification Review Board from December 2011 to January 2019. Her deputy, Tristan Sharp, is currently acting in a role. I imagine this may have more to do with just election politics in Australia and isn't really an indication that censorship in Australia is going to change. As you scroll down refused classifications, there's several episodes of TV shows and movies that have been censored. The video game The Curse of Kudan has been banned in Australia under the Automated International Age Rating Coalition system. The Switch port was going to be released on December 23rd, but it's not going to be available on the Australian store. But yeah, they are particularly heavy in censoring video games more than anything in Australia. But they're particularly heavy in censorship in general. In Australia, their government is seemingly very conservative, and then the people are not successfully voting out their government, which could be said for most countries. Here we have Video Games Chronicle covering the same story as far as Tomb Raider 1 through 3 remaster. It also definitely feels like there might be a problem in that if I was able to play Tomb Raider 1 through 3, 4, 5, and 6 of the Tomb Raider games may still be fairly unplayable. So, but I could see biding my time, having now played all of the rebooted Tomb Raider series. I can see biding my time just playing Tomb Raider 1, 2, and 3, and then waiting and hoping for remasters of a 4, 5, and 6, if you really even need to play a 4, 5, and 6 of the Tomb Raider series. Even if there is a 4, 5, and 6 of the Tomb Raider series, I'm not 100% sure there is. Xbox has deleted a post which claimed that Final Fantasy XIV Xbox beta was live. It was previously said the open beta would begin in mid-January to February. The GameDeveloper.com article here says that the Supreme Court has rejected the Epic and Apple antitrust appeals. The Supreme Court broke the years-long legal stalemate between Epic and Apple, and just not how either of them would have liked it. So they've opted not to hear either company's arguments about Fortnite and App Store, which would just leave things to any other lower appeals court, if there are any lower appeals court, which maybe they're not, or it would just leave things as it were. Seems like I would suspect Apple won most of the issues, and Epic maybe won 1 or 2 issues, if I recall correctly. And in the end, it may not matter as much as it seems, because the EU and other countries, Europe, may just force the Apple company to open up its app store or allow side loading anyways. And then the last big bit of news here, Netflix is done with the interactive show format. There's no alternate path to avoid this ending. This is from GameDeveloper.com with their silly subheadline. Good riddance, in my opinion. Like, it didn't work on a lot of devices for the 2 or 3 that they experimented with it, and the concept was definitely a gimmick that was only interesting once, maybe twice. The Black Mirror Bandersnatch episode, I was fairly unimpressed with it. For the extra effort you're going through to watch a somewhat mediocre Black Mirror episode, there was a almost like Tom and Jerry cartoon game I tried once, and it didn't flow naturally. You'd get these hitches. It felt very much like an early Laserdisc game where you're just pressing a button and then there's a pause for it to load the next section, and so there's just this hitch between the action and then the next action. There was a trivia game that I may have played once that was uninteresting. There was interactive, and there was a version of Minecraft Story Mode, which, again, the hitching issue there. I'm not sure anything. There may literally only be the NVIDIA Shield was powerful enough to ever run any of these interactive videos. Now, this isn't the abandonment of video games for Netflix. Netflix has just realized that it's way more logical and easy to have a video game section that would just install games to your cell phone as part of your subscription service. And so they're focusing more on having game developers make actual games that can just be installed on a cell phone, versus having game developers reinvent the wheel with interactive TV. The interactivity in Netflix should just be better systems to select new things to watch, which weirdly, the one interactive thing they could have done, and they could still do this without really calling it a game, is just have a pick out of these recommendations something you might like, or answer these few questions so we can recommend something different to you, or even a random button. It is a little weird that there aren't random buttons. It's a little weird that there aren't things that feel like TV channels where you would have multiple episodes of something, of different shows all airing in that same TV style on Netflix. Yes, most people just want to watch a show from beginning to end without commercials on Netflix, but there are a few people who just like TV and the way TV used to do things, and that should be an option too. Netflix really could just be a little bit of everything for everybody. Alright, well, and that's going to bring us to the games that came out in the last stream, and let's see if we can burn through these fairly quickly as far as what games might have a chance and should get a YouTube short. I'll give this one a chance. Versus the majority of games, which are going to be nothing. Here you have a Christmas game, easily 20 days too late. Here we have a game that almost certainly shouldn't have been allowed, just because F*CK should be red flagged as far as a Steam Direct list of a game. This is just a joke troll game, and frankly 2024 is not really the year to talk about Stalin too much. There are more people who are still alive worth talking about. Here we have what looks like a sleeping simulator, visual novel equivalent, but it seems like it's probably incredibly simplistic, and it looks like there's literally only one picture of the lady with different backgrounds, so I'm going to say no to that. There's a garbage game if I ever saw it. Here we have another garbage game. I didn't curate any of these games, so we're increasing with the number of games that are being released now that we're getting back into the groove of things, and we are increasing with a larger percentage of garbage games. Wish there was a faster way to get through all of these. Don't really know a way to do that. Inherently, I want some kind of paradigm shift to happen as far as new games, something that would allow me to make fewer YouTube shorts and focus more on just amazingly good games. I probably could pull that off if I waited a super long amount of time, but then that inherently is just going to be a middle step between me making pre-recorded footage of games that came out 5 to 10 years ago, if not much longer amount of time, and YouTube shorts, which are trying to cover games much closer to when they came out or before they came out. Yeah. Inherently, I would need more time to make quick looks on games and actually play them, whereas YouTube shorts are not quick looks. They're not the equivalent of a quick look. They're press releases and closer to news articles of when a game is announced. while it would be appealing if somebody else already curated all the new games, to have somebody else give me a smaller list of new games, I would have to 100% trust that curator, and that doesn't work unless I could copy myself. Which honestly, if I could copy myself, that would actually probably work pretty well. Assuming if I made a clone of myself or a copy of myself, I wasn't actually creating a deficit, in the sense that caring for and the expense of copying yourself was more expensive than the extra work you would get out of a copy of yourself, which is very possible. Two of me might just have me sleeping and being lazy twice as often, or me eating food twice as much food. Undoubtedly, I'm forgetting some news story, but I have this feeling I forgot a news story, but I don't recall it. I won't remember it. I'll give this one a chance, but I'm not going to make a YouTube short on it. I'm still trying to be incredibly cautious as far as showing anything that might have romance or adult content in it on Steam. Although maybe I'm still not doing the best of jobs on that. That is something else to think about as far as reprogramming the macros. We have a Japanese chess, shogi, I believe is what it's called. Problem with most of those games, I should check that in this case too, is that they tend not to really support English, or they tend to assume that you Chinese chess, Jingqi, or elephant chess. So not shogi. Yeah, this isn't Japanese chess, is it? But yeah, in both cases of the Chinese chess and the Japanese chess, though, they kind of assume you speak Japanese and you already know how to play the game, which that's arguably some of the problems with, I'll give this a chance, other chess games in the West, just regular Western chess. Now I find this interesting. Here we have yet another Japanese only language game. Let's see if we can translate this to get a general idea of what the game is. In the past, there has been controversies around having this style of animation in video games being on Steam. Some of that comes from this style of animation being done by some artist, or even the same artist, making highly explicit adult hentai porn content with highly young looking animated characters. They're animated characters, they're not real people. Characters are literally the age from when they were first drawn, so if you drew one of these characters here on a Tuesday, then they are a week old, or 1 day old. Like, that's the only realistic way to classify the age of a imaginary character. You can say a character is a certain age as far as the story goes, but whatever. So they've been highly resistant, basically because of one animator's works that wasn't ever tried to. They never tried to actually publish the adult content on Steam. They were highly resistant to let that animator publish a non-explicit game, and they didn't really have a good ruling for why. They just said no. And I would say that animator is probably not the animator of this game, because the style is a little worse than that. But yeah, the game here looks like it's a visual novel. It says elementary schools are allowed to attend. The main character is selected to find the culprit of bullying. The deductions he draws and the endings are not necessarily correct. Depending on the ending you choose, you might make someone suffer. So it seems like it's find the bully. I don't know why I'm hovering over things and it's popping up the translations. Oh yeah, that's the translation plugin doing that. I wish it wouldn't do that. Yeah, typically in elementary schools in Japan, they wouldn't all just be in random clothes like this. But whatever. It's a free game, so I imagine it's pretty short. In this game, the player becomes the main character, Arisugawa. Let you choose the culprit. There is representation of suicide in some of the butt ends. That's, I assume, a literal translation for bad ends or crap ends. Now, here's a great example of where the recommendation algorithm has no idea what it's recommending. When you click on the more like this, there's just nothing more like this game. But yeah. In fairness to Steam's over-eagerness to censor this art style and just depicting young characters at all, there is definitely a danger in having elementary school students in more mature type clothing, skirts, showing off perhaps more skin than you would like. Nobody here in any of these images look like they are really in bikinis or anything like that. Things that you could easily see if you just went on a beach somewhere. And there perhaps is a danger and complaint you could make in these styles when you make a character and call them an elementary school student, but then they seem like they are closer to junior high or even early high school students as far as their level of bodily development. Although there is also, I think, a false narrative there in that a lot of even elementary school students do develop earlier than I imagine parents want them to, or your traditional media would depict them. I'm going to put this game on the fall list just to see if it stays on Steam. Of course, I can't really do anything more with it than that. Maybe should have given that game more of a chance. I've noticed that as I try to burn through games, there's perhaps an increasing number of occasional closing of games that maybe did deserve a chance. But whatever. I wish there was more of a solution for these kinds of horror games, in that all the horror games seem to be too low quality, and I'd like to see the whole genre just take one big step upward in quality in 2024. At a certain level, a garbage game is always going to be a garbage game, but there is, with horror games, this middle spot where a horror game looks good enough that I can't immediately dismiss it as a garbage game, but I also can't immediately think that it's a good enough game to even put on the follow list. Here we have Sakura Succubus 8 from Winged Cloud, which highlights that there's at least 7 other Sakura Succubus games, and there's more Sakura games in general from Winged Cloud. Notably, the Sakura series, I don't think ever really got very far away from being lewd games. They would have predated the idea that you could have any adult content on Steam, and just never really gone in that direction. And then they're reusing the same character art over and over again, which makes probably good financial sense, but it probably comes off very repetitive. This feels like this is an actual visual novel, where Sakura Clicker is a clicker game, and there's several other Sakura games. Sakura just meaning cherry blossom in Japanese, or the name of the tree that drops cherry blossoms. Here we have House Builder. I think coming out of early access, so we'll make a YouTube short on that. But yeah, a lot of anime girls having the name Sakura. Cardcaptor Sakura, for instance. And that's it for the games that came out on Monday. But notably, I will end up having to deal with a much longer list that needs to be curated after this stream, because the macro is broken and I opened a whole bunch of tabs because of that. But that's a problem for later me to deal with. As far as the SteamDB lists, maybe Baldur's Gate 3 has gotten a bit of a bump. We're starting to see more numbers in the top 5 or so, and pretty high numbers up to the top 15. The finals are into the top 17, so it feels like they've dropped a little bit. It's still, as far as the charts, I don't think that helpful. Maybe I should just go for a more simplified number here, because I could just grab like the total number of gamers and total number of concurrent game players. But I question if maybe this chart here doesn't change that much. You just get bumps at certain times during the day, and then it goes down, and it just kind of stays very stable. Yeah, if I pay more attention to this chart, this may really indicate that 27 million online right now is consistently always 27 million online. Whereas if I'm not going to do that, and I'm eventually going to try and work on my chart, I clearly need to skip like the top 5 games. Apex Legends getting a bump, Baldur's Gate 3 falling back down, Call of Duty I think trending downward. But yeah, definitely doesn't feel like there's a major bump. Now, I don't know if they've actually started the beta to let individual game developers and publishers put their games on one-day sales, and I'm not sure if putting your game on sale is going to get it highlighted either at this top section or in this section. I can't even really remember which one of these two is the curated versus which one of the two of these are algorithmic. I think this is algorithmic and then this is curated. Deadly Premonition 2. That's certainly a thought. Murdered Uncle Marcus. Let me look at that game too. But most of these are algorithmic. And arguably, maybe I should make a chart based on new and trending games on this page. And then that would tell me about new games, but maybe not particularly trending games. Top sellers. If I was to look on that category, that's basically just getting what SteamDB says in a lesser form, with Steam Deck being a very large top seller here, the $350 version of it. Game streams happening. That's certainly something Steam could do, where if there was really a path to monetization at all, streaming on Steam would make some sense to me versus trying to continue to be successful on YouTube. Mega Man franchise sale. Then once you get past this point, you pretty much have to assume it's all algorithm at that level. So, probably because of glitchiness, I only have a couple of Video Games Chronicle articles open, but we can scroll down here and see that we've probably talked about everything else already. Tears of the Kingdom, Baldur's Gate 3 led the GDC Award nominations. 2K has announced a Top Spin reboot. We'll open that. Stalker 2 has been delayed. Frostpunk 2. New Xbox Game Pass games have been revealed. It's interesting. You click next page, but it didn't move everything with that. Yeah. So I think we've covered everything. We talked about that. We talked about that. And then that's going to bring us to the Gamatsu articles. I only have one tab open here. I don't know why all this happened so poorly. My guess is what happened is I did not have the macro set up correctly. There is also certainly an aspect here of news stories that are old anyways. Bandle Tale League of Legends story launching February 21st. And see, the weirdness about this is a game that actually looks interesting to me just on its own. Interesting enough that I'll put it on the follow list. So there is just this case where I guess I could play one League of Legends game. I think we pretty well covered every single videogamedeveloper.com article already. Raven Software once had a live service Call of Duty Zombies project in development. Let's see. I wouldn't be surprised if there's an overall thought that the Supreme Court in its current makeup just doesn't really want to deal with video games or software, things like that. But yeah, I could definitely see them more interested in doing something else with their time. Moving on. Seeing then we had the fall list cleanup, but then the fall list didn't work. We're not going to look at the fall list cleanup anyways. So all of my tabs are out of order. So 2K and the Topspin reboot from Video Games Chronicle. Topspin being a ping pong, nope, being a tennis game. Then he was that game who pressed mute on Uncle Marcus. Pressed mute, not killed. I thought it said who killed. The Deadly Premonition 2. Which it's well received well enough that this obviously could be on the wish list, so I'll move it over to the wish list. I don't know if I'd actually ever spend the time to even play Deadly Premonition 1. There's a lot of nonsense in between the important story elements. And then Xbox Game Pass titles up for console, cloud, and PC have been revealed. Upcoming additions include Pal World, Persona 3 Reload, and F1 23. And that's from Video Games Chronicle. And then the Final Fantasy Rebirth, Destined for Rebirth trailer on Gamatsu. Rebel Wolves story-driven dark fantasy RPG has been titled Dawnwalker, and it's currently in alpha phase, which frankly that early, even giving it a title, is perhaps a little pointless. The Fate Samurai Remnant demo is now available. Street Fighter 6 sales have topped 3 million, and here's a example of a more Japanese Twitter thank you for selling 3 million units versus how Video Games Chronicles just picked a random screenshot of Street Fighter 6 to use. It's a kind of weird art style. Frostpunk 2 launches in the first half of 2024 for PC and later for the PS5 and Xbox Series. Frostpunk 2 already on my following list, so I assume I already made a YouTube short on it. Foam Stars launches February 6th. We have a link to Steam. There is definitely an element here that if you're going to a foam party, it's probably very much a rave, and there's going to be loud music and probably alcohol and probably drugs and probably some sex. And assuming they're not including the alcohol, drugs, sex, Foam Stars will probably be this squeaky clean, like foam party equivalent at that point, but just the rave visuals in the art style and the fashion style and the loud music, which that in itself may not be enough. Although I don't think you really add much to Foam Stars if there is alcohol and drugs and sex happening in the foam parties also, or at least hugging, kissing. I imagine in foam parties, most foam parties, people aren't just getting it on the dance floor, but there's a sensuality that I imagine happens at foam parties. You see a little bit of that in this one character, and belly's showing, but then you have a character that's like fully covered in armor. And again, I still just don't know what you really do with that, or how you would make that make sense. Here's Gamatsu covering the Xbox Game Pass games, showing you screenshots for each. Persona 3 Reload might be a big one. Arguably, maybe you should have released Persona 3 Reload in December and have people spend a bunch of time playing it, because I imagine it's a pretty long game. Last of Us Part 2 Remastered Features trailer is available on Gamatsu if you want to see it. But yeah, when I talk about how I don't know how the game mechanics are particularly that interesting, and then your features trailers for Last of Us Part 2 is showing a mini game where you play the guitar, or the banjo in this case, that seems weird. Safe locks, some time, and some ammo, and then you have a bow and arrow with 1 ammo. Yeah, I don't even know what this is. If this is the number of arrows you have, I don't know what the 4 ticks are supposed to represent. Maybe that's your health. I would think this curved bar would be your health. Moving on, Warhammer 40k Chaos Gate Daemon Hunters is coming to the PS4 and 5 and the Xbox One and Series on February 20th. It's a turn-based strategy RPG currently available on PC, so let's inevitably look at it on Steam and see if anybody likes it. 73% positive in the last 30 days, 78% it is doing better than your average Warhammer 40k game, but not doing amazingly well. And then Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl being delayed to September 5th. Let's just make sure we have that on the follow list already. Yeah, I definitely am not going to want to make YouTube shorts on games that get delayed. Like, there's no reason to reward that kind of behavior. Alright. And so I need to manually definitely curate the games that came out today, because there's a long list that I'm scrolling through of tabs that are open. And many of these games are from like the 13th, because I just went back way too far. So that's more work on my plate of never-ending work to do. But yeah, once again, I've managed to try and average this down to 3 hours as far as live streams. So that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to support me further, there's a link down below in the description box. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.